members.
All right, everybody. Hey, thank you very, very much for coming. I think just the fact that you're here shows tremendous support. And I've been saying to some student groups, every year we have a staff appreciation week. And I think this is possibly the greatest staff appreciation week you could ever organize. So we just got to remember that what we're doing here is in honor of them and the sacrifices they've made for this college. I'm Schildge. I'm a senior here at Dartmouth College, and everyone always asks me, what organization do you represent? Why are you here? What organization made you care? It's not about the organizations that we're from. It's about the fact that we care about these people. We care about our college. We're just human beings who are concerned, and that's really important to remember when people ask you that question. It's who you are and not what organization you represent. We'll just go and introduce ourselves here.
I'm Orleck, and I'm in the history department in women's and gender studies and Jewish studies. And I've been involved with a group of people who are in this room, faculty who've signed a letter that we've submitted to the administration, calling on them to slow down and be creative and think more carefully about this position of layoffs being inevitable.
My name is Peck. I'm the Vice President of SEIU Local 560. I'm also a painter that works in FO&M. And I really appreciate everybody that's here tonight.
So I think it's really important to start with a sort of timeline, a map of how we got here. And this is a difficult thing to do because I feel like the picture is really muddled, and it's really tough to get from administrators exactly what has led to this point and exactly where we go from here. That plan really has not been articulated clearly to me, at least. But from what I can tell, and from what I know as a student, I can say that at the end of the fall last year, nearing the end of fall term, we all heard a really big, scary number. And that was the first time we heard it. We heard 100 million. And as far as, at least I can speak from my experience, that was what I heard about the budget crisis we were facing. My perspective is the administration led with that number. That was where they were going to start this process, and that was how they were going to push it through. It was scary, it was huge, and it really rocked people. So if you didn't hear about it, because it's possible you weren't able to attend that first public forum, it happened immediately before finals, and immediately before everyone left, it's possible, if you didn't read the D, that you didn't hear 100 million until you got back on campus. So a lot of you in this room, I'm sure, weren't even aware of what was happening until you came back on campus after winter break. By that point, if we really look at the numbers or look at the timeline here, you had 1 month to get involved before the trustees voted and this decision was made. So we're talking about a seriously compressed timeline in terms of how we arrived at the initial strategy, or how the administration arrives at the initial strategy. On February 5th, the trustees are going to meet here at Dartmouth College. They're going to vote not on specific layoffs to specific areas of the college. They're going to vote on whether or not they approve President Kim's overall vision for how he wants to address what he's been calling this structural gap that exists in our budget. If they approve his overall vision for how to address that, then the administration can go forward targeting specific areas of the college and going through with whatever layoffs, strategic reductions, reductions to health care, reductions to benefits, enforced furloughs, increased enrollment sizes, increased tuition, whatever else they propose to close that structural gap. My perspective is the majority of this structural gap that exists is a result of what many have called endowment mismanagement. And it's not that Dartmouth was that much worse than any other institution, but that so many other institutions in our position were mismanaging their endowments in the same way as us. So there was this disease throughout higher education where the race and the challenge wasn't to provide the best student experience, but to raise the most money, to challenge the other colleges to see who could have the biggest endowments. Once lawmakers and the public saw this, they said, that's not fair, you're hoarding all that lots of money, and you're not giving it to your current students. So increase the amount that you're taking out of your endowment and give that to the students who are currently in college. Otherwise, it's not fair. You're just accumulating massive amounts of money and not sharing it with anybody. So the college did that, and at least as far as the administration tells the story, that set us up for when this big economic storm hit us to be affected disproportionately because we had raised the amount that we were actually taking out of our endowment. Many of you saw these proposals, and if you haven't, I really encourage you to go to the administration's budget website and watch their presentations. They're informative, if a little bit confusing. And I know personally, I watch them and I really pay close attention, I listen, and I get it. I see the $100 million, and then I go get a drink of water and I forget it. And then I walk back and I try to get it again, but I miss it again. So That kind of brings us to where we are now. What happens next? Like I said, February 5th, trustees meeting. They're going to vote, like I said, on the overall strategy. And what they're going to initiate, from what I've heard from Steve Kadish, Carol Folt, that's the Senior VP and Dean of Faculty and Acting Provost, is that this is going to be a long-term process. So after that meeting, you're not going to hear that 250 people lost their jobs, even though that's the number that I've heard thrown around pretty casually, that at least 200 or more people are going to be laid off at the college. What you're going to hear after that meeting is a number of layoffs will begin. But while that's going on, because the union has been pushing for representation at the negotiating table, the union will be doing ongoing negotiations with the college, what we hope in good faith. So there will be ongoing negotiations, but from what we've heard from the president, the second budget proposal, the second budget presentation, is that non-union staff will start to get layoffs. He said there will probably be layoffs starting in February. So my first big point to make to you, and to try to articulate what's wrong with this picture, is that imagine a workforce or a workplace environment where you have a union actively negotiating for not only their own representation in this process and their own interests, but negotiating for the interests of every staff member here at the college. Simultaneously, the administration is going to initiate a process where non-union staff lose their jobs. If you were one of those non-union staff, I imagine you might feel considerable resentment towards the union. I mean, I personally would, but I feel like that resentment would be misdirected, because the person that's initiating that process is not the union. They're simply attempting to argue for everyone's rights, while the administration is targeting non-union staff, as a matter of course and a matter of efficiency. I mean, you can't really blame them if they want to do layoffs and they want to do them as quickly as possible, and they want to get this process done as quickly as possible. That's really the logical course of action. But we're saying that's the wrong course of action. So part of the problem is that the administration hasn't revealed the raw economic data. What we've seen so far in terms of their investment portfolio, in terms of the economic practices and spending practices of the college, is raw economic data that was then distilled and presented to us in a new form, in a form suitable for public presentation. It's not to say that that information is wrong, but it's to say that if experts were to take a closer look at what really went into crunching those numbers, it's possible and conceivable that they could have come up with another option. That's not to say that we need to actively challenge the $100 million figure, but that I think it's just a little strange that we have a tough business school, one of the most highly regarded schools in the country. We have an excellent economics department, and of all these people, we really haven't heard someone say, hold on, slow down a second. Can I take a look at those numbers and see what I can come up with? All we've really heard is, this is the number, this is the way it's got to be, now let's go and get going on these cuts. So yeah, what I've heard projected is massive layoffs, and that's really, hasn't been disputed even actively by anyone. The problem with the administration is they seem to have a PR problem. They have a messaging problem going on. They're telling one group one thing, and they're telling another group another thing. They're telling the Valley News in a statement, let's see, last Thursday or 2 Thursdays ago, that they were not going to negotiate with the union. They refused to negotiate. But then the very next day, they sit down with the union and initiate a meet and greet session, thus starting a process of negotiations. While never publicly retracting the statement in the Valley News, the union received a letter which was addressed, their letter was addressed to President Kim. They received a letter back from the HR department saying, we are going to negotiate with you, and we look forward to collective bargaining, but sorry, the process can't slow down. So there is a commitment to collective bargaining, but the process has to go forward with the utmost urgency and speed. I don't know how you have a fair, good faith negotiation where in the back of your mind you're thinking, well, we have to really rush this really fast and make this decision now because it can't wait. So what we're hearing is really an inarticulate message. And the biggest problem with this, and the problem that I guess I'll leave you with before we kind of fill in some of the gaps that I obviously must have left in this presentation, is that what I see as the biggest problem here, I'm not ideologically, but philosophically, is that when the administration presented this problem to the students, the faculty, and the staff of this college, and our community, we can't forget that this college is the economic engine of this community, they presented this problem with a number out front. From the very beginning, it wasn't what do we value as a community. It wasn't we're facing this problem together, how can we band together and make sacrifices as a group to overcome this. From the very beginning, it was 100 million. That's the number, and that's what has to drive this. And from then on, that's what we had to follow. That whatever we said here, whatever was discussed in favor of the staff or to avoid faculty pay reductions or cuts to the highest earners at the college, whatever it was, you always had to remember in the back of your mind, $100 million. And I think that that gives us a really unique advantage.